What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Now, it's been a little bit of a while since we've done a video like this, a sit-down discussion about my top 5 players heading in towards the Perfect World Major, who are my up-and-comers, prospects, maybe tier 2 names that a more casual viewer wouldn't have heard of. These are top 5 players for me, in order, who I think are players to keep an eye out for heading in towards the opening stage. Now, of course, before we get underway in towards any of the names on this list, as you can see by the pretty abomination of a look on my face here, I'm raising a bit of money for charity for Movember, hence why I'm growing out the mustache a little bit. Everything else is shaved. Not my usual look, it has to be said, but it's all for a good cause. So it's all for mental health and men's health as well. So if you want to donate, there's a link down below. It all goes to charity, and I'll be doubling all the donations up to a certain amount as well. So it would go a long way. So go check out the link below. It's all for a good cause. A bunch of the commentators are joining me on this one as well. So it's a little group effort as well. So go and check that out. But I mean, without further ado, let's get underway and towards this list. Now, the first name on my list is none other than 17-year-old Snow from Pain Gaming. Now, he first got a bit of notoriety when he got signed to Young Gods, which is Godsend's academy team based out in Brazil, and then made a bit more of a name for himself, getting the move to Casa Esports. And he was there for just over a year before getting the big call-up to Pain in May of this year, playing under experienced leader and, of course, bit of a local legend in the South American scene of Big Azera. Now, for Snow, he plays anchor position on the CT side. On the T side, there's a lot of lurking. All round, a bit more of a supporting element into teams. He's not this hero rifler. He's not even playing really great spots to get a lot of notoriety and to get a lot of impact. But for me, has been somebody that I've been very, very impressed with. Pain went 3-1 at the Americas RMR, and you know, the only loss being to Wildcard is not that bad. Wildcard shocked us all, going 3-0, and you know, for Pain to slip up there, it wasn't the end of the world. Now, he himself put up a very respectable 1.21 rating, and playing in quite tough roles, that is no easy feat for the youngster. And especially for him, he's gone up by 30 points in firepower alone, according to the HLTV ratings. Was a 42 firepower generally over the last kind of 3 months or so, but in that event specifically at the Americas RMR went up to a 72 out of 100. So that average firepower going up is always good to see. Pain as a whole have actually had a pretty decent year. They went for a big rebuild, and with the only kind of remaining factor being that of Big Azera, this sort of legendary IGL, he's done a very, very good job of bringing this squad together and actually allowing them to compete in, you know, what is quite a lot of lands throughout the year, and even winning our ESL Challenger League not too long ago with back-to-back wins over MIBR, 2-1 in a best of 3 and 3-1 in a best of 5. Now, for me, Snow, he has a lot of potential, and to be playing so well at only 17 years of age with the right leader, which luckily he has in Big Azera, I think he has all the makings of being a stalwart in the South American scene for many, many years to come. So for me, definitely the first name on this list to keep an eye out for heading in towards that major. Will Pain go that far? Who knows? They have the ability to make deep runs, and if I'm being completely honest, it's probably not going to be primarily off the back of Snow's roles, right? You know, being an anchor, he's not the one that you're looking towards to put up numbers. We're looking at Lux, Cowwares, you know, NQZ on that orb. We're even looking at, of course, Big Azera too. But Snow, for me, is somebody who I think is very, very talented, and I've been impressed with what I've seen. And, of course, being this his first major at only 17 years of age, I've been very impressed with what I've seen thus far this year. And I'm hoping that we get to see a little bit more of it out there in Shanghai. Now, the second name on my list is the 20-year-old from Gamer Legion known as Slend. Now, the primary AWPer of this team, who was sort of another one of those stars who graduated from the very elusive MOUZ NXT Academy roster, also has started to really showcase what he is all about. He had obviously just shy of a year on Endpoint, which is where I really got to see the bulk of his work, playing in and around kind of the tier 2 and the tier 3, and he always looked incredibly solid, very flashy in moments, always reliable when he was kind of called upon, and of course Endpoint loved having him as a player. And then he got that big call up to Gamer Legion, where he obviously got noticed by a bit of a legendary British coach, that of Ash, in March of this year. And for me, I mean, I think he's looked incredibly solid. You know, at a rating of 1.12 for the year, 2024 has not been bad for Slend at all. And especially considering that he's sort of had quite a significant move up from Endpoint, who were, I would say, unfortunately sort of struggling in sort of the tier 3/4 these days to Gamer Legion, who are even getting to play relatively regularly against tier 1 oppositions, getting land chances, getting the chance to prove what they can actually do in these sort of environments. I think Slender's looked very comfortable. You know, he's got a bit of a cheeky 92 out of 100 rating on the sniping, which isn't too bad, but also sort of what you'd expect from him in his respective role. But by no means sort of had this Gamer Legion side been anywhere near the successes of Paris, right? And that's safe to say. The Paris Major, an historic run for them, and a lot of those players went on to do big things, as we've seen. But I really do believe this rebuild actually has quite a lot behind it. And I think Ash has done a great job in picking up a lot of good pieces, and Slend primarily is one of the ones I was always behind. I think he's a very solid AWPer. He looks good when you watch him. He has these really flashy moments, but I just think having a bit of a reliable piece in that AWPing department is such a big difference in CS2. And for me, Slend, I think, is definitely one that could have a couple of moments heading in towards the major itself. Now, if I'm being completely frank, I don't expect Gamer Legion to go all that far. I mean, they had a decent RMR, don't get me wrong, but they did squeak through in 7th place with sort of back-to-back 2-1 wins over BetBoom and Falcons just before that. So it wasn't exactly the smoothest ride. They got the final spot heading in towards this opening stage. But for me, Slend, he's had a really decent couple of moments within the RMR, and I think he's always a very fun AWPer to watch. So if you don't know him already, keep an eye out for him when watching some of these Gamer Legion games, because I do think he's a real talent. Coming in at number 3 on my list is 19-year-old rifler from Wildcard. It's that of Susp. Now, the somewhat superstar Swede who got that pretty big move, and a bit of a wild move, I guess you could say, for Wildcard at one point throughout this year, did shock a lot of people. But I think the big shock was, you know, he made a real name for himself playing within EU and primarily playing on Swedish teams throughout the vast majority of that, but most notably it was Metasport, who in the early part of this year actually had a really good run, and Susp was a large part of that. Plays a lot of these sort of anchor roles and supporting positions, and for me, I always thought was very solid. And then Metasport made this pretty wild decision to let himself go, let ZTR go at one point as well, and, you know, God knows for what reason, because both have now qualified to the major and gone on to do bigger and better things, whereas Metasport have barely even been able to scratch the surface or scrape the surface of anything even sort of close to that, especially since the start of the year when they made these sort of miracle runs, Blast Showdown and the rest. So for Susp, I think it's definitely a guy you can keep an eye out for. He plays primarily anchor roles on the CT side. On the T side, it's a mixture of sort of lurking at times and other times sort of in the pack and in the thick of it. And with Wildcard going 3-0 at the RMR, there's definitely a lot of limelight on this side, and I think individually had a nice couple of moments. You know, his individual rating went up by 0.06 compared to kind of regularly in the Americas RMR specifically, and they beat some pretty respectable teams along the way. You know, Liquid, I think, was a pretty good win. The Penguin in particular, I think, was a massive win for Wildcard, and then 9Z in that best of 3 to qualify as well. So for me, big wins, which is always good to see for this wildcard side. But, you know, I always thought he was an incredibly solid supporting anchor and supporting kind of elements over when he played in EU. And now he's under kind of, you know, a pretty tenured IGL in Anastan. I really think he is sort of coming towards his own and playing alongside his fellow countryman, Fuzi, as well. I think his confidence looks through the roof. So don't expect him to be doing incredible highlight plays or be a man to put up the insane numbers, because that's not the positions or the roles he plays, but I think he's very solid. I think he's got a very good head for the game as well, so keep an eye out for Susp. As a debut as well, I'm really excited to see what he can do on that big stage in Shanghai. At number 2 on my list is 20-year-old Flammus from Gamer Legion. Now, he had a breakout tournament earlier in the year at IEM Chengdu playing under Nemiga back then, where it was even a bit of a shock to see Nemiga even make it to that tournament. They made it through the online qualifier, which a lot of people didn't expect. They actually scalped some pretty big teams along the way, but at IEM Chengdu alone, he looked incredible. He's a very flashy and aggressive rifler. He's a joy to watch and has all the right elements to be sort of a regular fixture on a top team, whether that's international or Russian speaking as well, as he obviously can do both. For me, you know, he's definitely, I'd say, the most fun rifler to watch on this list. Definitely the flashiest of all of them. And he's sort of what your MM or average sort of face-it teammate thinks they are. Being able to kind of single-handedly take over rounds, multi-kills, finding incredible pockets and gaps into ways to expose teams. For me, without a doubt, is definitely one of these players that you have to keep an eye out for. Whether Gamer Legion do well or not, I think is up in the air. But Flammus, on an individual note, has all the right makings to just be a talent, whether it's in this tournament alone or heading in towards 2025 in the new year. When he first got picked up in towards his Game of Legends side, he was a little bit rough around the edges, I think is probably the safe way of putting it. You know, he played a little bit more of a looser system in Namiga, but when he got the move to Game of Legion, Ash has done an incredible job of sort of polishing this diamond and incorporating him in towards his team and honestly allowing him to shine. So for me, he's one of those players that I always love to watch, and I have to put him in at number 2 on this list. His individual rating, he put up a 1.23 at the RMR, and with 2 losses dotted in there, that's actually very, very impressive. His firepower rating was a 91, his entrying was an 84, and his opening was an 88 stat across the board on HLTV. I mean, these numbers are very high considering, you know, he does play a lot of these high impact roles, but he's doing a very good job at it. And not only is he doing a good job, but he's really fun to watch, not only from sort of his impact in the server, but these little kind of segments we get of him on the camera, making jokes, laughing with the team, and really getting to kind of express in and out of the server his individuality, which is always good to see. Game of Legion, they rely pretty heavily on him to do well, and so far he's done a very, very good job at living up to that, filling some quite big boots and actually playing very, very well in his sort of respective roles. At the major, I think of kind of all the tier 2 debutants, especially in terms of the rifling department, he has to be one you keep an eye out for. He's very fun to watch. He's what a lot of people try and emulate in terms of their rifling style when they're kind of pugging or playing alone or whenever you queue in. And for me, I definitely think it's always been a bit of a joy to watch in the scenes. I really hope that we get to see not only Game of Legion, but him on an individual note showcase just how good he can be. He has all the right makings for it. He's one of these riflers who can completely take over a server. It's just whether he gets the right support in this side to do so. But I think under that legendary coach of Ash, I think he absolutely can. They've allowed him to really shine. They've allowed him to do what he does best, which is take fights, take heads up angels, and just showcase just how good his mechanical prowess actually is. So without a doubt for me, number 2 on this list, and definitely for you guys at home, keep an eye out for this kid, whether it's in Game of Legion or not in the future. I definitely don't think this is going to be one of the only tournaments we hear from him. Now, before we get to number 1, I do have a very quick little honourable mention, which is that of Fuzi from Wildcard. Now, I didn't want to put him in this list for one reason, is that I actually already think he's well known enough in my eyes that he doesn't really count as sort of a newcomer or a tier 2 or an up-and-comer. This is a guy who's obviously been around the scene for a while. He's had these stints briefly within tier 1, but I think in Wildcard he has looked incredible. For a while, he was playing for Wildcard domestically in North America while still being in Sweden. He struggled with visas, hence why he couldn't play for Wildcard at ESL Challenger Atlanta. They had to get Friend to step in. But I do think for me, this guy is so fun to watch. You know, this isn't his first RMR either. He even played the most recent RMR before this over in the Asia RMR. He's playing with Rare Atom back then when they were kind of a mixed side. And, you know, it didn't really do all too much. Nothing really came from it, but I still think he's definitely a player for me who is one of the more fun AWPers to watch on this list. So in towards the RMR, just keep an eye out for him. I'm putting him as an honorable mention basically because I think he's well known enough. But if it wasn't for that, I think he easily would have been in contention for first, if not second place in this list. And last but most definitely not least, number 1 on my list of players to keep an eye out for heading in towards this major opening stage is the 20-year-old AWPer over from Passion UA. It's Jambo. Now, this is a guy who I think has had a lot of limelight, especially from us who follow the tier 2 scene. We've been singing his praises. We've been singing Passion UA's praises as well. They've made this heroic fairy tale run coming through the RMR. Not a lot of people expected them. I will say I did as well. This was always a dark horse team for me heading through the RMR, and I'm really glad they got to showcase just how good they actually can be. For the last few months, he's averaged a 1.21 rating. He looks incredibly good. He's one of these flashier style of AWPers, can shock on all but he wants to, hence why he always seems to absolutely kind of pass the eye test, as we like to say. Passion UA as a whole, they went 3-2 throughout the RMR with, you know, losses to Big and Heroic in best of threes, but they managed to qualify by beating Astralis 2-0, which I know many people were happy about. Not so much for the Passion UA side, more just for the downfall of Astralis side. But a lot of credit has to be given towards this team for the whole run they made. And obviously a lot of the praise has gone to people, for example, like Fear. I think the IGL on this side has done a very good job, and I think he's really brought this sort of bunch of misfits to the top stage and got this ability to showcase how they can translate online performances from tier 2 in towards tier 1 on LAN. And, you know, for a variety of tournaments as well, when you look at Jambo's individual ratings, it's been an absolute sea of green. And the only really one doubt you can have on him individually as a person or just Passion UA as a whole is the fact that they actually just have such little LAN experience as a team. So there is still question marks and reservations about what this team can do on a stage in front of a big crowd when they have kind of all these added externalities and pressures around them. But for me, Jambo feels like he's kind of is one of those players who could actually shine under those sort of conditions. One who gets to level up a little bit as he gets confidence, starts to back himself in his own ability. So you never know what you're really going to get from Passion UA, but I have to put him as number one on my list. I think he has a lot to give. And, you know, without a doubt, he has to be my number one prospect for all of these reasons combined. You know, you've got to watch him in terms of in the way he plays, his style of AWPing. He likes to be a little bit loose at times. He's given a lot of free reign. Fear has obviously a lot of trust in Jambo in the way he likes to play. So it gives him a lot of kind of maneuverability and allows him to sort of play the way he wants and be reactive and adapt on the fly. So whether it's in towards the major cycle itself in the opening stages or in towards 2025, I think Jambo for me has been an incredibly prominent AWPer within this tier 2 scene. For those of us who have been following the tier 2 scene, it's not a shock to see Passion UA do well, and Jambo individually too. He's always been lights out in these online competitions. I'm glad they're one of those teams who actually could translate it towards LAN performances too. He might even be one of those guys who is sort of on those lists for getting moves to potentially bigger teams, right? I think, you know, there's a lot of teams who have been weighing up their options in terms of young and exciting AWPers and all these prospects that come through. And with a very busy 2025 schedule, Jambo for me feels like he could be one of those players who gets a little bit of a look in, gets a trial maybe somewhere here or there, or Passion UA continue ramping up. I know they all re-signed contracts just before the RMR, so there's been a lot of trust from the organization themselves, which is really good to see. And from my understanding as well, is very fluent in English. I think he actually, maybe even, for last I heard, might be living in Ireland, which is kind of sick. But either way, Jambo, number one on my list. Very talented AWPer, a lot to offer up. Very, very good when you watch him in the game. And I think, obviously, with Passion UA's sort of historic run, I think he's sort of coming towards this spotlight a little bit now. And now it's about his time to prove it at the major itself. Now, if I'm being honest, do I think Passion have the ability to make it past the opening stage or make it in towards a deep run? I don't know. It feels quite doubtful. I feel like there's a lot of talent. And I think Passion UA do have a few areas which could be fixed or could be improved, which would make them a potential dark horse or a potential contender. Do I think they're in that stage yet? No, but this is all about LAN experience for them, and this is going to be a pretty big tournament now heading in towards the major itself for Jambo to showcase, can he actually do it on these LAN stages in front of a crowd with the lights on and all the rest. It's going to be a big test for him. But from what I've seen of him all throughout this year online, I've casted them a hell of a lot because they play so much damn Counter-Strike. I think he's got all the right makings to be a top level AWPer. So I've been really impressed with him. Has to be number one on my list. And without further ado, that is my top 5 with, of course, one honourable mention, that of Fuzi, coming through to round out my list for the top 5 sort of prospects, up-and-comers, tier 2 names to keep an eye out for if you're not as familiar. Now, for a lot of my kind of colleagues obviously work in the tier 2 scene, we know all these names, we know all these guys, but this is more for those who maybe don't follow as much of that lower end of the scene and maybe want to see who could potentially be an underdog, who could potentially have a little bit of something up their sleeve. I think these 5 names have the ability to do so. A lot of them play anchor roles because they're young and it's about gaining experience, but I do think they've got a lot up their sleeve as well. So I'm excited to see what they can bring as well. And one of the things I always love about majors and about RMRs is the fairy tale stories that we do get. Like all of these are sort of had in their own respective ways. Gamer Legion qualifying at that last stage, Wildcard going 3-0, which nobody expected, right? Snow, 17 years of age. I mean, he's the definition of the babyface killer. He looks like, you know, a kid, bless him, because he is a kid, right? And then even seeing these kind of guys come through and actually showcase just how good they can be, like Passion UA, and translating it from online performances to LAN. So keep an eye out for these guys heading in towards the major. But without further ado, thank you for watching. It's been a pleasure. Of course, like I mentioned, there's going to be a donation link as well for Movember charity down below. And of course, if you're new here, subscribe, like, all of the good stuff. Thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure. See you soon.